Well, the church today does not ordain women in the Catholic churches. And we need to understand that the history of the ordination of women is very, very deep. First of all, in the Eastern tradition, but also in the Western tradition. Essentially, since the 12th century, women were ordained to the diaconate, East and West. Heloise, famous Heloise in Abeloth. Heloise was a deacon. Saint Radegund was a deacon. She was, I think, 6th century. Phoebe of Romans 16, is the only person in all of Scripture with the job title deacon. Now, I'm not here to tell you that Phoebe was ordained, but in the first few centuries of the church, the diaconate grew, and it grew as a ministry, and it eventually developed liturgies. And those liturgies to ordain people to the diaconate were used for both men and women. There are certain sections where there are a couple of different prayers for males and for females, but the liturgy is pretty much the same. We have conciliar documents that give regulations on how old a woman must be to be ordained a deacon. Conciliar documents of Nicaea and Chalcedon, where they argue that a woman who is ordained cannot marry, so therefore we know she's part of the clergy. So why won't the church ordain women today as deacons, at least? Well, the diaconate died out around the 12th century anyway. There were never women priests, but the diaconate died out. Well, if the diaconate dies out, there's no way to ordain women. Then we get Gresham and others creating laws about ordination, and the ordinations that they're talking about are always sacred ordinations, and they're sacred ordinations to priesthood. So in the past 800 or 900 years, the developed theology of ordination really addresses priesthood. And the law is women cannot be ordained as priests. And that's pretty definitive, the way it's been stated. We have Ordinatio Sacerdotalis in 1994. Before that, we have Inter Seniores in 1976. But it's pretty clear that women cannot be ordained as priests. I mean, so why doesn't the church ordain women as deacons? Well, it's only since Vatican II that the diaconate has begun to be restored, and they've only renewed about half the diaconate. They have not renewed the female part of the diaconate. One of the arguments is, well, the deacons of history, the women deacons of history, they only created space to educate women. They only helped with female baptism, and we don't do that anymore. We don't need to have people unclothed for baptism, so we don't really need women as deacons anymore. And my response is, you know what? If you're saying that the women deacons of history only ministered to women, well, who's ministering to women today? So why won't the church ordain women? Well, the church won't ordain women because it hasn't yet understood that to ordain a person a deacon does not necessarily mean the person must be ordained as a priest, nor does it mean the person must be eligible to be ordained as a priest. We have something like 40,000 ordained male deacons in the world. I would venture a guess that how many of them would be eligible to be ordained as priests. First of all, most of them are married, and the church law still says that married men, for the most part, cannot be ordained to priesthood. But there is the education, there is the ability to be sent, there is the ability to work as a priest, and many of the deacons may not have this ability, but also they have a vocation to the diaconate. A vocation to the diaconate is separate from a vocation to priesthood. So why won't the church ordain women? I don't know. I know that the Holy Father, Pope Francis, in his interview with Antonio Spadero about a year ago, said the church must find a way, must have more space, more space for a more incisive presence of women in the church. Well, this is a no-brainer to me, because by ordaining a woman to the diaconate, the woman will become a cleric. And a woman who is a cleric then has the ability not only to preach, and that's certainly a big part of the diaconal vocation, but a woman who is a deacon would be able to preach, proclaim the gospel, and preach in a mass. But more practically speaking, as a cleric, the woman would be able to be, for example, a single judge in a marriage tribunal, Right now, if a woman writes a single judgment in any kind of church tribunal, she can't sign it because she's not a cleric. She has to run down the hall and get some guy to sign it because a cleric must sign it. If a woman is chancellor of a diocese and is not a cleric, there's certain paperwork she can't sign. You can't fully obtain certain offices in the church unless you are a cleric. Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, we have to change all that. We have to make it different. Well, I dance with what brung me. I belong to the Roman Catholic Church. I understand its rules. I understand its regulations. I'll work within the system, and I think the easiest way to work within the system right now, and the best way, is to ordain women as deacons. I really, really believe that. So if Francis is asking for people to go out in ministry, and I believe he is, I think Francis also needs to ask women to step up to the plate, to some of them, not everybody, to be ordained to the diaconate. Think of what would happen. Think of what would happen if at a papal mass in St. Peter's Basilica, a woman was vested proclaiming the gospel. What would that say to the world? What would that say to the world about the dignity of women? What would that say to the world about the way in which the church thinks about women if the gospel is entrusted to a woman who is vested to proclaim in St. Peter's Basilica? I think that is the answer to so much of the world's ills. Not only the problem that a lot of women have with the church, but also the problems of women outside the church.